Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of The Devil and the Deep Blue Me, and I am your host, Rich Bruck. So I had this interesting conversation with a student last week. I think she's probably 23, 24, and she was telling me about how her roommate moved out and now she's living alone for the first time in her life. And she said something that kind of stuck with me. She said, I don't know how to be alone with myself. Which, of course, got me thinking, because that's a very specific thing to say. Not, I don't like being alone or I get lonely, but I don't know how to be alone with myself. Like it's a skill that she never learned. And honestly, it is a skill. It's maybe one of the most important skills that you can develop. And somehow we never really get taught it. We teach kids how to play well with others and how to share and how to be social, but we don't teach them how to enjoy their own company, how to sit with their own thoughts without immediately reaching for some sort of a distraction. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I realize I'm someone who's gotten pretty cool at just being alone. Not by choice initially, it's just how things worked out. But over the years, I've learned to actually enjoy it. And I think that's made all the difference in everything. When I was younger, being alone felt like failure, I guess. Like, if I was by myself on a Friday night, it meant something was wrong with me. I couldn't just be alone. I had to be alone and feel bad about it, you know? But somewhere along the way, that shifted. Being alone became my default setting. And then it became my preference a lot of the time. Not because I don't really like people, but because I learned that being comfortable with yourself is kind of the foundation for everything else. So today, I want to talk about that, learning to be alone with yourself, because I think it might be the most underrated life skill out there. Here's the thing about being alone that nobody ever tells you. There's a huge difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is what happens when you're alone and you don't want to be. Solitude is what happens when you're alone and you're genuinely okay with it. And learning to move from loneliness to solitude, that's where the magic happens. I know I learned this the hard way. I went through a period of my life in my 30s where I was suddenly living alone after being in a long relationship, and I had no idea what to do with myself. I'd gotten so used to having someone else around, someone else's energy to bounce off of, that when it was just me, I felt empty, like I didn't really exist unless someone else was there to, basically confirm it. So I did what a lot of people do. I filled up all the silence. TV constantly on in the background, or music always playing, always making plans so that I wouldn't have to face, another empty evening. I was alone physically, but I wasn't really alone, I was avoiding myself. But eventually, and this took way longer than I'm proud to admit, I started to get curious about what would happen if I just didn't fill the silence. What would happen if I sat with my own thoughts for a while without immediately trying to distract myself? And of course, it was very uncomfortable at first. Your brain, when it's not being entertained, will bring up all kinds of stuff, worries, regrets, things that you said 10 years ago that still make you cringe. It's like your mind has this backlog of thoughts that it only processes when everything gets quiet. But here's what I discovered. Most of that stuff isn't actually as scary as you think it is. And when you stop running from your thoughts and just let them happen, they usually resolve themselves fairly quickly. It's the avoiding them that gives them all the power. I remember the first time I spent an entire evening alone without any background noise and without checking my phone every 5 minutes and without having the TV on and just me and whatever was in my head. It was maybe 3 hours. And by the end of it, I felt a little cleaner somehow, like I'd organized a closet that had been, cluttered for years and years. And then I started to notice other things, like how much more I appreciated music when I wasn't using it to fill silence. How much more I noticed about my surroundings when I wasn't constantly looking for some sort of external stimulation. How much clearer my thinking became when I just gave it some space to breathe. Teaching music helped with this too, actually, because when you're teaching someone to play an instrument, you have to teach them about the space. The notes you don't play are just as important, if not more important, than the ones you do play. Music isn't just sound, it's sound and silence working together. And it's the same thing with life, I think. The busy parts are important, but so are the quiet parts. And if you're always filling up the quiet parts with noise, you never get to hear what your actual life sounds like. I have the student, a different one from the roommate girl, and he's always got his earbuds in, which I find is fairly typical. But I mean, always. Even when he's walking from, the car to the door, which is, 10 feet. And I asked him about it once, and he said he can't stand the quiet. It makes him anxious, which I actually get because I used to be the same way. But I also wanted to tell him that the anxiety isn't coming from the quiet. The quiet is just revealing anxiety that was already there, and you can't solve it by drowning it out forever. Learning to be alone with yourself is learning to be okay with whatever comes up when you stop distracting yourself. And most of the time, what comes up isn't really that bad. It's just thoughts. It's just feelings. The normal stuff of being human that we spend so much energy actually avoiding. But there's another level to this, beyond just being okay with your thoughts. There's actually enjoying your own company, looking forward to time alone, treating yourself like someone you actually want to spend some time with. I think this is where a lot of people get stuck. They can tolerate being alone, but they don't particularly like it. They're just waiting for something better to come along, whether it's a text message or a phone call or plans with someone else. But when you learn to genuinely enjoy solitude, everything actually changes. You stop making plans just to avoid being alone. You stop staying in relationships or in friendships that don't really work just because, they're better than nothing. And you start making choices based on what you actually want, not just what will keep you from having to face yourself. And paradoxically, once you're truly comfortable being alone, you become much better company for other people too. You're not coming to every interaction desperately needing something from the other person. You're bringing your whole self to the conversation instead of just the parts that really need validation. I actually tell my students this all the time. If you can't enjoy practicing alone, you're probably not going to enjoy performing with others. Because all the real learning happens in those quiet moments when it's just you and the instrument, working through difficult parts and listening to what's actually happening. And it's the same thing with life. All the real growth happens in solitude. Not because being with other people isn't important, but because you need that quiet space to process everything, to figure out what you actually think about things, to discover who you are when nobody else is watching. Anyway, so some time for some random trivia about being alone that I just found fascinating this week. Did you know that the word solitude comes from the Latin solus, which just means alone, but it doesn't have any negative connotations? Whereas loneliness is a much more recent word, and it only showed up in English about the 1600s. Before that, being alone was just being alone. The emotional baggage came up later. And here's another one. Studies show that people who are comfortable with solitude tend to be more creative, more self-aware, and actually better at relationships. They're less likely to stay in bad relationships and more likely to form deeper connections when they do connect with others. And then there's research suggesting that people who regularly spend time alone, truly alone, without any devices or distractions, have better emotional regulation and less anxiety than people who constantly seek external stimulation. Like your brain literally needs quiet time for it to function properly. And here's something I didn't know. The concept of introversion versus extroversion isn't really about whether you like people or not. It's about where you get your energy from. Introverts recharge through solitude, and extroverts recharge through social interaction. But both types benefit from learning to be comfortable alone. There's also this thing called solitary confinement in prisons, which we've all heard about. And it's considered cruel and unusual punishment, specifically because humans aren't supposed to be completely isolated from others. But that's much different from chosen solitude. The key is having the choice, having the option to connect when you want to. And speaking of solitude, I did have a breakthrough this week with Ghost of Plans, the song I've been talking about. I was actually sitting at the piano with, again, no distractions and no background music, just me and the keys. And suddenly the bridge that I had been struggling with, it just, appeared. It's this line about sitting in the quiet between who I was and who I'm becoming. And I realized that's what the whole song is about, really. Those spaces between versions of yourself and how you need the quiet time to actually process the transition. I think some of my best songwriting happens in those completely alone moments. Not because I'm trying to write, but because I'm just sitting with whatever's going on in my head, and sometimes it just happens to turn into music. I've been experimenting with these longer periods of just sitting at the instrument without any particular agenda. No phone nearby and certainly no clock watching, just seeing what wants to come out. And you know what? It's produced some pretty interesting stuff that I know I never would have found if I was in, productive mode. Maybe that's what I'll share next episode. One of these solitude experiments. We'll see how brave I'm feeling. So that's what I've been thinking about this week. Learning to be alone with yourself as a skill worth developing. Not just something you endure until, better company comes along. If you're someone who struggles with this, and honestly, most of us do initially, start small. Try spending 15 minutes without any external input. No phone, no music, no TV. Just sit with whatever comes up. It gets easier, and eventually, it gets genuinely enjoyable. And if you're already good at solitude, maybe think about what that's taught you about yourself. Because I think people who are comfortable being alone often have insights that are worth sharing with people that, that aren't. They're not there yet. Next episode, I want to talk about choosing your battles and choosing your people. Because once you're comfortable with your own company, you get a lot pickier about who else you spend your time with. Until then, enjoy whatever company you're keeping, including your own, and have yourself a safe and happy week.